Bill and I have spent a little bit of time this week, and thanks to Bill, by the way. He's been on the road for 3 weeks before he got back. He got back on Wednesday night. He stumbled in for a little while on Thursday. We talked for a while, but I'm not sure he remembers anything we talked about because he was clearly feeling it from the travels at the Cat. You look much better today.
I'm much better today.
Oh, good. But Bill came in on Thursday and Friday, a little bit yesterday. We chatted and between us pulled together a presentation about finances in particular, as you'll see. But it's a first of what I hope are a couple of conversations about where we are as we lead into the annual meeting. Next Sunday, the forum is rather more open-ended than this one is. Next Sunday, Joan will be on hand to help facilitate a conversation that you all get to take the leading role in, so we don't script that one out. This one is scripted out a bit more. So, a financial snapshot, we're calling it, and that's fair. It's not intended to be a detailed presentation, it's not intended to tell us everything we need to know about where we've been and where we're going, but it's a picture of where we are in a moment in time. In the January newsletter, and you can't read that, and that's not the point. That point is just to put out in front of you the January newsletter. We began laying some of the groundwork for this. On the back page of the newsletter, below the fold, if you will, you might have noticed this. I hope you have. If you haven't, I'll remind you that the annual meeting is in 3 weeks. January 31st. At the annual meeting, of course, we review the year that's been in different ways. If you have responsibility for some area of ministry that should be reported out to the congregation, it's best if you can give us a written report. It's best if you can get that to us sooner rather than later, so that Jan can begin pulling that together, the written report that gets handed out at the annual meeting. We'll preview 2016, and your reports, by the way, for your different areas, need not merely look backwards. It's really nice if they can look forward. When I tried to think if it was an issue here. I don't recall that it was, Pete. You can tell me if you were messing this up before.
I'm sorry,
I know, and I caught you off guard. In previous parishes I've been, I've had to make a point of saying what the annual meeting is. So, for example, it's very common, I think, for churches to talk about the annual meeting in January of 2016 as if it were the 2015 annual meeting. And I say it's not the 2015 annual meeting because that suggests that the only reason to have it is to talk about what's happened. It's the 2016 annual meeting. It happens in 2016. And a piece of what we take stock of is what's happened. But we also look ahead. And if we're only looking backwards, we're doing nobody any favors. So it's the 2016 annual meeting. I don't think I had to fix that problem here. But I have had to in some previous parishes I've been in. So a review and a preview, and part of that is the financial pieces, and we're going to talk mostly about that here this morning. But then we're also going to do some other things. We're going to say thank you to people who have been serving in the past. John Boland, Karen Hauswald, and Terry Ramsdorf have been serving as members of the vestry at large, and Tom Lowry as junior warden. So that's all a piece of what we'll do. Karen Hauswald was eligible to serve another term on the vestry, but she decided she'd rather be junior warden, and she's done that in the past, and that's going to be a wonderful change for us. Tom Baxter, as I mentioned at the 8 o'clock service this morning, is going to step in and work with Karen on building and grounds issues. He's going to head up the building and grounds committee, and so it's going to be interesting to see. I told Tom it's taking 2 people to fill his shoes. So
yeah,
that's going to be really good.
He's not done yet.
He's not done yet.
He's not done yet.
No, he's not done yet. I keep telling him that. So, I'll just say it now. We'll say a bit more about it in the coming couple of weeks. But we have 5 nominees for 3 vestry positions that are opening up, so we will have an election this year. 2 of them, I think, are here this morning, Julie Lear and Kathleen Martin. Kathleen wave, Julie wave.
Jim.
Oh, and Jim!
Jim.
Behind the camera, you just disappeared. So, and Jim Allen, yes. In addition, Donna Young and Holly Hendricks. Holly's not here this morning. She's often here at the forum, but not always. Holly, I think, will be at the 10:15 service as well. So we'll meet those people as well. So all the business that we have to do at the annual meeting. So a piece of, and this is the real focus of today. A piece of the annual meeting is finances. A significant piece of the most recent issue of the newsletter was talking about finances in a narrative form. How many of you have read that thoroughly? Oh, excellent. I'm actually seeing hands. I'm surprised. I kind of expected when I said thoroughly, you'd all say, well, if you've read the pages 2 and 3 of the newsletter, from here on down and up on the top page, you've already heard what it is we're going to talk about this morning. Except it's sort of, to some extent, still words and generalities. And so Bill is going to get into some of the particulars now. This is my time to reach out and tag you in. Oh, and if you don't have it with you, we have extra copies. So if you want to read and follow along, this is your opportunity. Oh, one person's taking me up on it. Good.
Just out of curiosity, I don't know, I'm not going to ask this question because I'm afraid of the answer, but for those of you who have never been at our website, this is it. And down here along the left side under our publications and recordings is the Sunday bulletins, which come out on typically late Thursday or on Friday in anticipation of Sunday. Recordings and text of the sermons are out there, and the trumpet. So if you don't get a paper copy and you've been saying, well, I can't read the trumpet because I don't have a copy, go to the website, go to that page, and they're all out there, or at least the last 4 or 5 months, I think. That was the right one. So, let's talk a little bit about 2015 in review.
I'm going to be your technical support here.
Oh, okay.
I'm going to take the stuff off the top and the bottom. Oops. Sorry. So much for technical support.
I was gonna say.
Where's my mouse?
Try that.
What have you done to me here?
There it is. What's the big deal? Okay, on to business. Let's take a look at our revenues in 2015. Now, before I go on, a couple of thanks. The first one goes to Jan Stalker and Bob Selder, who do the heavy lifting every month on putting our finances together. The numbers that you're going to see today, in some cases, are final numbers, and in some cases are not, but this stuff is all close enough that for practical purposes, it'll give you an idea of where we're at. Obviously, for the year-end meeting, everything will be finalized, but Bob and Jan are still trying to close the books for the end of the year, but I think we've got all the pieces and parts in place. So, pledge revenue. Just a quick explanation of a few things that are on these lines. What pledge revenue is up there is a combination of the money that has come in to fulfill pledges, monies that have come in that are in excess of your pledge, and then some money that is actually last year's, well, would be the year before last pledges that didn't get paid until last year. So the way they do the finances is if you don't pay your pledge in the rest of the pledge in December, you pay it in January, well, it actually ends up in the next year's finances. So there's where we're at. We had budgeted 300, actual 297. plate is a combination of people who come in and put money into the basket as it's passed around, and also what we call sustained givers, those who are people who don't want to pledge, but typically we can depend on them putting in a certain amount each month, month after month during the year. Special is a gift that we have been consistently receiving from a congregant that we feel like perhaps last year was the last year that we're going to get that gift. Actually, last year we thought we weren't going to get it, and it turns out we did, so we'll see what happens this year, but we are not including that in this year's budget as far as anticipated revenue. In the other category, we have money that's come in from the foundation, a carryover from a challenge grant that was actually the year before last, and some other miscellaneous odds and ends. And this additional revenue was the line item in the budget from last year that we said, this is the additional money we're going to try to bring in to close the deficit that we had anticipated, and that came in at almost $14,000. Questions on that so far?
I'll just add the observation. I take it should be fairly obvious, but when you have an almost $400,000 budget and you come within $2,500, $2,300 on it, you've done pretty well with budgeting, I think.
Moving on to expenses, really not going to delve into this very much. Basically, expenses for the year were slightly below budget. Keep that word budget in mind, because just like in your own house, sometimes things work out better, sometimes things don't work out as well. So again, just like Jed said, this is really close. One of the things that was a big variable for us really was under property, because moving back into the building and not knowing how the heating, ventilation, and air conditioning was going to work and all that, we really weren't sure from a utility standpoint how things would work out. But actually, we've come in pretty close. Really all I was going to get into on this is that so here's where we're at for the year. Our actual loss deficit for 2015 is $19,000. Let me give you a little perspective on this, because when you look back, when we started the year, the actual deficit that we were predicting was $35,000. And because of these other efforts to bring in some additional revenue, really, this 18 looks really good compared to the 35 that was anticipated at the beginning of January. So there's good things to be seen here, and those of you who know me as a pessimist, and this looks good to me, so. A couple things, something that happened in 2015 is there was a building and grounds committee that was formed. Tom Lowry, as junior warden, is the chair of that committee, and I believe that as we move into February of 2016, the junior warden will continue to chair that committee. No?
Tom
Oh,
Baxter
Tom
will chair it,
Baxter.
but Karen will still, of course, have some responsibilities related to it.
Yeah, so the ball's in Tom's court. Anybody else here on the Building and Grounds Committee? Jerry and David in the back.
Pete Lowry was here a moment ago, but he's gone off the choir now.
So, the major project that they took on, two things before we move on. One of the desires, both from a good practice standpoint, and also because of requirements from the Finance Committee, and also from the Rector, who wants us to keep on top of these things, is what we need to be looking into the future to determine what we have to potentially pay for in the future. It's called deferred maintenance. In other words, if you've got a water heater, you can expect that in 15 years, you're going to need to buy another water heater. And if you don't anticipate that you're going to have the money for it in 15 years in your normal budget, you better start saving for it now. And that's kind of where we're headed. The creation of a comprehensive list of capitalized projects, and whether we're going to take them on this year, the next year, and we're working through that process. The biggest project that was taken on for 15 was all this deferred maintenance that had to happen over at St. Helens. The sidewalks that were falling apart, the doors that worked part of the time. We had one door coming out of the sanctuary that you couldn't get out of. Slight problem if there's a fire, okay? So all these things that needed to be done. Now the one thing in here that isn't a deferred maintenance item is adding card readers to the doors, to some of the doors, but that's to bring it into a line with the access control that we've set up for this building so that we don't have to continue issuing physical keys out to people. It's a lot easier to give you a card, and if you lose the card, we just take you out of the system and you can't get in the door anymore. So that's the project for 2015.
What's the parking lot apron?
The aprons are the little entrances that get up into the parking lot. Technical term. Let's take a look at our assets, because it's really, when you look through our financials, there is a lot of money out there. And just to give you a feeling for what is our money to be spent on something and things that are not our money to be spent. For example, let me get back to my old notes here. For example, in that first line that says real estate and non-parish funds, the real estate, of course, is the value of the property that we own. These buildings, the grounds, and their contents. The other non-parish funds are things like Condega's money, Family Kitchen's money. We carry that on our books, but it isn't our money to spend. Looking at the other funds here, something fairly dramatic happened in 2015, and that was the two bequests that Ann Fari gave us. And I'll tell you how that fits in here in a second. Building maintenance funds, $128,000 of that money was given to us by Ann.
Wow.
So we didn't have near that much as far as funds available. We could not have done the work at St. Helens without that bequest. Memorial funds are those given for specific memorial purposes. Designated and outreach is another place at 319. 128 is from Ann to be used for outreach. And you'll hear more about that at some point in the future. Vestry to determine. These are unrestricted funds from the standpoint that the vestry feels that they can use them for any purpose that the vestry so feels that the need exists. And again, that money, a big chunk of that money came from what was left over from the fire. So, and I forget what the actual amount of that was. I think it's 100 and, I'm not going to say because I'll get it wrong, but it was definitely in six figures.
Well, I just want to say just something very quickly about that, because that was a point of some contention. When the vestry was looking at that final settlement check from the insurance company, there was some feeling, in terms of recommendations of what to do with that we needed to put that in the building fund, because it was money given to us from the insurance company at the end of the day, the final settlement. that we needed to put that in the building fund because it was given to us by the insurance company to pay for costs of rebuilding of the fire. And we talked about it back and forth at some length and decided in the end that that isn't really a requirement. They didn't give us the money and say you can only use this on building. This was to say we're giving you this and we're closing the account. We're not going to give you any more. You don't get to come back anymore. And the analogy we came up with as we talked about it is if I were in a car accident and totaled my car and the insurance company gave me a replacement, let's make up a number, $20,000 to replace my really nice car, depreciated. And I decided thereafter I was never going to drive in a car again because they scared me. I was only going to ride a bicycle. There would be nothing that would oblige us to use the money to buy a new car. We could buy our stinking bicycle for $100 and put the rest of it in the bank. And that's pretty much the decision we came up with here. At the end of the day, that money, that last check, wasn't given to us with any expectation that we used it to buy anything in particular or do anything in particular. It was given to us to say, okay, we've been going through this process with you now for a couple of years. We're going to give you this last check if you sign off and say we're done. And we said, sounds fair to us. And that's what we did. So,
What he said. So looking ahead to 2016, and if you've read the article, this text is essentially out of that article in the Trumpet, but it basically says that, as we move into 2016, in most cases, we're anticipating our expenses to be the same as 2015. A major change in 2015 was, and actually we've been ducking this for a couple of years. I think it was probably 4 or 5 years ago maybe that the national church said, you have to put your employees on the national church's insurance plan. And there's an hourly requirement, an hourly requirement in that. But basically in Eastern Oregon, Trinity is the only church in Eastern Oregon that has staff over and above the rector that falls into this category. As we looked at that, the insurance was very expensive, and we've been, not to go through a whole bunch of detail, the last couple of years, we've been just kind of ducking this whole thing. Well, something that's happened is that under the Affordable Care Act, we have to bring employees that are putting in a certain number of hours into a plan. The national church, as we've already said, is requiring this, although, we'll talk a little bit more in a second. Let's just say that. So we're canonically obliged to do it and morally bound. I mean, we really need to make sure that we take care of these employees. Let's back up for just a second. One of the canonical obligations, however, is to provide parity for our employees with our rector, with our priest. We've put Jan and Bob under the national plan.
you mean Jan and Mark?
Jan and Mark, excuse me. Sorry, Jan and Mark. And so we've made that step, but they are definitely not at this point in parity with the rector. Their insurance is as good, or I think in Jan's case, perhaps slightly better than what she was purchasing on her own. But one of the things we'll have to face in the future is how do we bring them up to the standard that the church wants. Another aspect of this is that under the Affordable Care package, there's some changes that are going to be made in the next year, and it's kind of,
I see.
it's kind of fuzzy is a good word as to how that will also affect this whole thing. So I don't know if anybody has any questions at this point. There's some, there's some really good news. We've got first thing is that we have $44,000 in new pledges Now, that doesn't mean we have $44,000 more than we would have. We actually, the change from last year to this year, if you look at the numbers, is about 36,000, and that's because there's some people who are unable, who have elected not to perhaps pledge as much, but we also have lost people in this last year to death and relocation. So to go from 316 to, or from 280 to 316 is really good news.
And Bill, can I just throw in?
Please, Joan.
44,000 is really a delightful figure because those are new people to our parish. So that shows growth in our membership.
We made a slight change to this the other day because we said total pledges. Well, if you'll reflect back to the conversation on pledging and sustained giving, this is actually 153 people have responded to the call to make a pledge or to support the church in some way. So there's 25 new pledges. 108 people have either increased or will continue to maintain their current pledges. So this looks really good. I think there's a lot in that change in revenue, the number of people. There's a lot to be thankful for in this. Joan, anything else?
No?
Anybody? Okay, in the category of bad news, and this needs a little bit of explanation, and I wanted to go back to my notes, and we're not going to delve into this in any gory detail, but as we said, this is what we ended up with 2015 in our deficit. That number, these are all very, very preliminary numbers. And before I delve into this anymore, some kudos to the Finance Committee. A couple folks are here. David Carroll, who else from Finance? I guess David's the only person here, but we'll be delving into this in a little more detail next week at the Finance Committee meeting. But a question that you could immediately ask is, okay, if our expenses are pretty much the same as they were last year, and we now have $36,000 more in pledges than we did last year, how can our deficit have gone up by $32,000? Well, without, again, giving you a raft of detail, last year we had $12,000 that came in excess of pledges. And we don't count on having extra money coming in from pledges. So there's $12,000. We talked about the $19,000 special gift that we've not anticipated this last year. We're not anticipating it this year. There is no challenge match carryover from 2 years ago. And we had the $14,000 that came in from the summertime and living is easy. So there's your $50,000. So on a rough basis, going into 2016, we're anticipating somewhere around $50,000 as a budget deficit. And this is a note that Finance Committee will be looking at this in some detail, and we'll be talking to the vestry. Impact of the deficit on our reserves, if that deficit was as big as we anticipate and no other additional revenue comes in. Right now we have $66,000 in reserves. Take off the 50, it leaves us $17,000 at the end of this year in our reserve account. The big question is, are the reserve funds the only answer? Well, the reserve funds obviously are not the only answer. There could be another challenge match. The vestry could determine that it would cover portions of this, perhaps from vestry to determine funds. We ain't going out of business, folks. This is hard stuff, but there's every reason to believe that we're going to be okay. This looks ugly, and the ugliness will be somewhere between this and 0. And this time next year, we'll be talking about this again, and hopefully that number's a lot less. I wanted to talk a little bit about the Finance Committee because I have to admit that as the assistant treasurer prior to this year, one of my responsibilities was to make sure that we had monthly meetings. And with everything going on around this place, that whole business all fell apart. We were not having monthly meetings. So we've put a great emphasis this year on to making sure we have our monthly meetings and we're looking at our finances and making sure there's nothing strange going on in income and expenses. We've also reestablished ourselves as part of the process of evaluating non-routine expenses. For example, if someone wants to spend $40,000 on something, it would come to us as part of the evaluation process to say, do we have the money? What's our opinion on this? So we're in that process. We had, without getting into a lot of detail, and we still do have a raft of restricted funds that we've attempted to go in. We've cleaned up some of those. We've done some consolidation. We had a bunch of negative accounts, which was always goofy to me. I'm glad Bob's not here because Bob would take issue with that, Bob Selder. But from an accounting standpoint, it probably made sense. From a look at the book standpoint for us, it was just goofy. We've created a policy approved by the vestry that talks about what our responsibilities and our purpose is. We have a policy defining our investment policy for short, medium, and long-term investments. And hopefully that's going to get kicked off in more detail in February, taking some of these funds that are that we know will be sitting there long-term and try to get a little bit more money eked out of them. For the
Can I just give an illustration of that?
Yep.
So some of you will know about the Monahan Fund. And so because of the way in which that was established, apparently the vestry has to have control of that, but cannot spend any of the principal. So it is an endowment fund, and normally that would, it seems to me, go over to the foundation because that's what the foundation is. But the way this was set up, it's not allowed for the foundation to manage it. It has to stay under the management of the vestry. And in years past, it just seemed like the fiscally conservative thing to do with that is to have it in CDs. Well, as you know, CDs are not earning but 0.25% interest or some such ridiculously low number. And we know we could be conservative and keep it safe and still invest it and get a better return. And so the Monahan Fund is one of that's the easiest poster child for the program. So it would fall under a long-term investment because you can't touch the principal. So you invest it in a way that is in accordance with what you ought to be doing with long-term investments. Morally, the vestry has a fiduciary responsibility to earn more, not to just settle for a pittance. And so when we can free up some CDs, which is the goal of the Finance Committee, free up some of the monies that are currently locked up in CDs as those mature, invest it in something that's very safe, still really pretty conservative, but can still give you maybe 3 or 4%, then we're better off doing what the money was supposed to do on our behalf. So that's just a poster child for that whole point.
And we're so fortunate because we have people like Dave Carroll who knows something about those kinds of investments and can be a resource to us that, utilizing all the resources of the church is one of the things we like to do, and we've got that opportunity.
So, For 2016, again, talking about building grounds projects, and these are major projects, there's other miscellaneous things that potentially will go on. We're going to replace the heating and ventilation systems in St. Helens. It's a mess over there. Some of those units are 30 years old. We're going to put a permanent video projector in the sanctuary. You know, that space, trying to get it prepared to use for more things, one of the things we need all the time in there is audio and video. And the projector will be going in January and in time for the conference on the 21st. 28th, excuse me, thank you. There's other things that have been approved, pending final review of the bids. In St. Helens Hall, we went to, when the sanctuary burned, we put fire detection in there. We left provision for it to extend out into the remainder of the building. So we want to get fire detection and alarm in the remainder of the building. There's issues related to the lighting at the entrances and the ramps that needs to be fixed. The north building needs to be painted. Here in Trinity Hall out here at the end of the sidewalk where the water pools, we need to get that water drained away, which could be, we don't know what's underneath that slab out there, so we'll find out. Here's the impact on these reserves. As we said earlier, we have $165,000 in the maintenance. We haven't come up with a final number yet, but my opinion, and the Finance Committee hasn't passed judgment on this yet, is that as we move into the future, we need to keep $50,000 in our maintenance reserves. $50,000 could be, one event could take a big chunk out of that money. We have $15,000 worth of expense from 2015 projects that have been started but haven't been finished that we'll have to pay for. The approved and bid projects that we already have on the board, for example, the 77,000, and there's probably another 25,000 for those things that we're still trying to figure out what they would cost, like the drain out here. If you do all of this, you don't have any money left. Well, obviously you have the 50,000, but we need to continue to be careful about what we're spending this money on and make sure that as we move into the future, we carry some kind of reserve, whether it's 50,000 or 40,000 or 50,000 is twice the reserve, as far as I can tell, that we've ever carried, at least since I've been here at Trinity, which is not, of course, been that long. Questions on that? That's basically it. Have any questions on anything related to finance or? Again, there's certainly things that are not good here, but there is so much that is good. I'm optimistic, and as I said, that ain't easy.
I want to just sort of close it off with a bit of a spotlight on what Bill and the Finance Committee have done. It's one of the real steps forward we've made this last year is to get that committee up and running functionally and helpfully, and so that's just terrific, and thank you for that. Again, I'll shine a spotlight, as Bill did, on the encouraging signs of new pledges. I've never seen $44,000 from new pledging units in a single year before. That's huge, and that's an encouraging sign for us to take forward. And you alluded to it. Well, you more than alluded to it. You say that the other real piece of good news and all of that is the establishment of that Building and Grounds Committee again in this past year. Another very important step forward, so that we don't just sort of, when something arises, we pull together an ad hoc team to fix it. We actually have people who are paying attention to this stuff and coming back and meeting again and saying, okay, where are we now? What did we do last month? Okay, where are we got? What do we got to do? And just working, and on all the parts, working more and more together. It's just those are very positive steps forward, and I hope we don't miss that. The challenges are there. The challenges are real. Let's not miss that either. If we don't do something to make $50,000 smaller, we got some big problems ahead. That's very sobering, and I want to be absolutely clear about that. So swallow hard on that, even as you take in all of the good news too. It's a both and. You know, let's not look at one and forget the other. Either way, you know, but let's hold both of those right now. And between now and the annual meeting, Finance Committee is going to do work. It's meeting on Tuesday this week. Vestry meets Tuesday the week after. And there may be more to come. But those two meetings in particular are coming up. And out of that will come recommendations for the annual meeting. And at that point, we'll all have a better sense of what's going on. And at the end of the day, we look to the congregation to adopt the budget. The language there is a little bit funny, by the way. I think the annual meeting adopts a budget. I don't think the annual meeting tweaks the budget. I think either you adopt it or you send it back to the vestry for more work. But the language is a little bit fuzzy there too. That's a small point.
Well, we have in the past changed the budget minutely at an annual.
And I suspect everybody would be comfortable with that. But again, the language is just a little bit funny. It specifically says that the annual meeting adopts the budget, and that's an odd term to have used. I think it should be more helpful if it wants to do the other. But nevertheless, Judy, you had your hand up.
Yes, if people have clever ideas on ways to get a bit more money, is there anyone to whom they should send their suggestions?
You could send it to anybody in the vestry. Probably initially it'd be best to send it to Dave, who's a member of the Finance Committee, to Bill, or to myself. Certainly all of us would be most interested. Any member of the vestry, Joan certainly is Joan has actually been, I overlooked her, but I have occasionally remarked on it many times, but having Joan as senior ward has been one of the other great steps forward this year too, so you can certainly refer things to Joan as well. So yeah, by all means, if you've got an idea, don't keep it to yourself, share it, please. You can share it with anybody, with everybody, because that's what we're all about. And some of that might be part of the conversation, might be. Not predicting and not drawing up the agenda for it, but it might be part of the conversation next Sunday. Yes, ma'am.
Is there any possibility with the audio-visual upgrades in St. Helens of renting it to other groups that are having a hard time finding? Like we couldn't do what we did with the Baptist Church in Redmond because we're landlocked. We have parking. We couldn't get in, but we're paying good money to 2 different churches in 2 different towns for access to high-grade audio-video, and we have been very particular about we have instructional tape, video, and so on. So it's hard to find rentals with excellent communication.
Yep, absolutely. I mean, we're looking at everything. Jan takes inquiries and follows up on them. The 2 offices that were temporarily where Joan and everybody and the rector had their 2 offices next door in St. Helens have been refurbished very minimal expense. Boy Scouts came in and actually did most of the work on it. But we'd look at those offices as additional rental. You don't call them rent, but rental opportunities.
Well, we're too landlocked, and we're paying good money to the Redmond Baptist Church to rent what is a gym.
Yeah, absolutely. But yeah, I mean that St. Helens is. There are a lot of things happening there that most of us don't see, and there are more things that could happen there. Absolutely. Probably not another church on Sunday morning because between Compass Church and the Bend Church, formerly known as the United Methodist Church, and Trinity Church, there's a lot of traffic that hits us all at once on Sunday morning. So we're probably not looking at adding another huge congregation there. But there's that.
Well, this
and
is
I think
a
there's
monthly meeting.
Yeah, but that's a good possibility because there are some groups that meet there monthly. Tizay community Tizay services happen there monthly now. There's a Bend Zen meets there weekly. There are a number of things like that going on in that space, and there's more that we can be doing for the community, and probably some ideas we haven't fully fleshed out for us. So those are all good things. Yes, sir.
I'm hearing all the things that we're looking at spending our money on. Is there any plan to try to resurrect the youth program?
From a financial standpoint, there isn't. I'm having some conversations. This is a separate issue. I'm having a little bit of conversations with some of our younger families about where they are and what we might do to be more responsive to them. That's a separate conversation from all of this, and I'm not sure what it does in terms of impacting the bottom line. So,
Yeah.
Yeah.
Well, it's the-
As you have intimated in your question, new initiatives like that generally cost money. They don't bring money in.
There's no question of that, but
We didn't spend all the money that we budgeted last year for that, for youth and family, it said.
Yeah, yeah.
So on that, is the upcoming budget going to reflect what we spent last year or what we budgeted last year?
I don't think we have an answer to that because, again, I think Bill's giving us a snapshot there that really gets ahead of ourselves because we haven't had the Finance Committee meet to go over this in detail. We haven't had the vestry meet to go over it any further. So at this point, I couldn't answer that. I don't think anybody could because I don't think anybody should until the Finance Committee actually does that work.
Just one thing that, from my point of view personally, is that I feel really, really comfortable about where Trinity is health-wise. Yes, we have a $50,000 deficit, but we have a very strong structure for finances, and we have very strong vestry that's very thoughtful about it. And it's comforting to me that the information is coming out more.
And we're debt-free.
And we're debt-free. And we have beautiful buildings. So we'll get through it.
Well, thank you, Bill, for all this you've given us today, and thank you all for being so attentive.
Thank you.